Earthlings, welcome.
Hey, what's going on? You got a bag over your head. Not that that's a bad idea.
Ronnie, don't tell anybody, but I'm on the run, and I'm on the run from the police. So I went on the run in 1986, which was almost 40 years ago, and
has that bag lasted all that long? Because that's a biodegradable bag, so it's not. So it can't be very good biodegradable bag, can it? In all those years, it's never degraded.
No, this is not the only one.
You've got a whole load of biodegradable bags put over your head.
Yeah.
So why are you on the run? Because our trial and everything's over. I've been in jail. I've come out of jail. So why are you still on the run?
Well, I'm not going to believe that unless I hear it from Sir Frederick Lawton.
Well, Frederick Lawton was the judge in our case, but he's been dead for a few years, so you ain't going to hear it from him.
All right, so that means I can take this off then.
You can take it off. He's dead. He can't do any harm to him no more.
Oh wow. Okay, brilliant.
Put it back on. Go put it back on quick.
Yeah. Well, that's good. So, okay, so Frederick Lawton is dead, and we're still alive. Well. So we'll do a few lows in a minute. So don't forget this thing about if you're not on YouTube, that's the best place for it. And obviously this thing about we don't charge for you to have your comments put on the screen. It's been a bit of a bittersweet day today, Ronnie. Started off. I got my birth certificate, and so I had to get a second birth certificate for my pension application. So I got that, and so I shot down to the post office and sent that off to where it needs to be, and by recorded delivery, so to make sure that they can't say that it didn't arrive, you know. And then one of the VIP people rang me then after that and said that they'd found a seagull with a broken wing. So it's on the other side of the city, across the river. So sadly, by the time I got there with Neville, the VIP van, the seagull had died. So that was a bit bad. So
yes.
And then the worst part is I got to do a show with you, Ronnie.
I know that. to cap it all, shall we say?
To cap it all, yeah.
And it's very difficult. I mean, I found a little bird in the garden that was the other day that couldn't fly, and I put her in the box. I was going to take her down to the one of our nearest wildlife hospitals. Neither of them are that near. They're both about 3/4 of an hour's drive, but they're the nearest one. But sadly, before I was able to leave, she'd passed away. The little bird had died, which was rather sad.
It can be a little bit taxing to care sometimes, can't it, Ron?
Yes, it can be. Yes, yeah.
So Michael was the first, so still alive and first.
He gets
so
surprised.
I said, "You are, Michael." I said, and then Paul was second and also alive. Then we got Deb. Hi, Deb. G Vegan. There's a name to conjure with. I think it might be a new person. So welcome.
Yes. I wonder if that is. I'm wondering if that is actually Japanese.
I wonder.
Yes.
And they're intrigued by the title, which you're going to explain in a minute.
Well, I kind of I think we'll have another Ask the Audience thing, shall we?
Yeah. And let me continue the hello. So we've got Linda Carroll. Hi, Carol.
Yeah.
Vegan Angelical. You'd probably vegan Jellicle, I suppose.
Vegangelical, yeah. I mean, I think that's a really
vegan
good word.
Jellicle, wouldn't it?
Yeah.
Vegan, yeah.
Vegangelical. It means like a vegan evangelist. It means you go out
and
spread
I
the
know.
vegan message. Yeah.
Hey, there's Joanna. Hello there. I think that's it so far. Yeah. So sorry to interrupt you. What were you saying?
Oh, what I was saying earlier. Yeah.
You're gonna ask the panel
like we did before a few shows ago. Who was Hiroo Onoda? Does anyone know who Hiroo Onoda was? So if people can put it in the comments, we'll see who the first one to get that right is.
We were debating how to pronounce it, weren't we?
Where it was Hiroo Onoda or Hiroo Onoda, but most people seem to pronounce it Onoda.
Okay. Well, let's be honest.
Let's see. Who was he? Who's going to get it right first?
Yes.
Or what's he famous for? What was he famous for?
So no, from
now, yeah. Wait a minute, yeah, Paul. Paul's got it right. Paul's got it right. Yeah. And to prove Paul's right, you've got a little clip.
A little clip, yeah. But I love the way you can sum up history so kind of easily. Oh, here's the chap who didn't know the war.
Yeah.
Oh, he was that guy, wasn't he? That guy, yeah.
Yeah.
So there was a new vegan channel started about 2 months ago, Ronnie, and the person was asked if they know anything about the history of veganism. It wasn't by me, and this guy goes, "Well, it was started by Leslie Cross and some other dude."
Yeah, that's great, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So should I show this film then?
Yes.
Right. Here we go.
Soldier kept fighting 30 years after World War II. Hiroo Onoda, the last Japanese soldier to surrender after hiding in the Philippine jungle for nearly 30 years after World War II. Onoda refused to believe the war had ended, engaging in guerrilla warfare and killing as many as 30 people. He finally surrendered in 1974 when convinced by his former commanding officer. Onoda was later pardoned, returned to Japan. His story highlighted extreme loyalty to the emperor among some Japanese soldiers during the war.
Yeah, I was. I'm not all that convinced about this interpretation that it was extreme loyalty to the emperor. It could have just been that they didn't know.
Well, they didn't believe it. You see, what happened is there were attempts to inform him and the other soldiers with him that the war had ended. There was a couple of leaflet drops where I don't know whether it was the Japanese or the Americans dropped leaflets saying, "Look, the war is over. You can come out now." And they didn't believe it. They thought the leaflets were fake.
Yeah, but you wouldn't know, would you? Yeah. Would you believe it in that circumstance?
Well, possibly not. But they, particularly one of the leaflets, they scrutinised and said, "No, this is fake." But it was only when his former commanding officer went to the island and convinced him to surrender, and then of course he returned to Japan as a hero.
I bet everybody in the chat is doing this now. Everybody in the chat.
The rest of his story isn't that great because he later went to Brazil, emigrated to Brazil and became a cattle farmer in Brazil, which isn't great. So he kind of went from, but he killed a lot of farmed animals when he was in the Philippines because, that's what they did. They went around the farms killing the animals and eating them, taking them and eating them.
Well, this is a good point. I mean, that is true too in terms of Japanese culture, especially back then.
Yeah, that could have been part of the reason. Yeah, that was kind of true. He was ordered not to surrender and not to commit suicide as well. So that's presumably why he went on like he did.
Well, I think there's some Tory politicians who believe this too, Michael. To be honest, they're I'm not sure Boris ever realised that World War II had finished, really, to be honest. But
No.
there you go.
Well, I think he thought he was some sort of Churchill, didn't he?
Yeah, he liked that idea, didn't he? So
yeah. So basically, Hiroo Onoda was a guy that carried on fighting the war 29 years after it ended. You see. So how is that relevant to the animal liberation
I'm
movement?
glad you mentioned that, because I was just about to ask.
Yes. Well, the idea of people fighting a war, or I would maybe, in relation to the animal liberation movement, I would more class it as a battle, because I think there's an overriding war or an overriding struggle for animal liberation, which is what we all want. All of us that are animal liberationists. But I think there's a particular fight with that, a particular form of struggle, which really the kind of effectiveness of which long ago ended, but people are still attempting to fight in that same way. And I'm kind of really referring to really to pressure campaigns, to campaigns that are seeking to pressurize the government to make any sort of meaningful change in relation to protecting other animals. I think there was a time when we were all involved in those things, and maybe the most dramatic form of that kind of campaigning was the Animal Liberation Front, and of course, for various reasons, that went into decline.
You didn't see the ALF as being directed towards the government, though, did you?
No, no, it wasn't directed towards the government, but it was directed against companies to which the government gave support, and so the government was, very much kind of a party to that struggle, because you see, we have governments that are very, very closely linked with corporate business, and so they will seek to protect corporate business from what they see as a tax upon it, and inconsistent, and that's absolutely consistent with their kind of neoliberal ideology. So of course we had a situation where the government stepped in really in support of those corporations that are under attack. I mean, particularly the vivisection industry. And so you had a situation where special police squads were formed to arrest activists. New laws were brought in. Sentences became much tougher, and then increased surveillance and all these things, which served to pretty much not totally bring an end to the ALF, but the ALF actions are tiny these days, especially in the UK, compared to what they were. So, effectively, it's pretty much been brought to an end in terms of kind of being able to have any kind of widespread effects.
Yeah, well, our mate David Henshaw claimed that at its peak in the 80s, the ALF were carrying out 6 actions per night.
Yes,
in Britain.
yeah, and that's absolutely true. But a lot of these actions were small. I mean, there was one night when myself and a friend, we travelled from kind of sort of more or less central London area out to the outskirts to attack this push car that belonged to a slaughterhouse owner. And on the way there and on the way back, we catapulted 84 windows of various shops connected with the oppression of other animals, fur shops, butcher shops, burger bars, fishing tackle shops, all along, because basically it was just like one total long high street of shops, which is what you you've got in London where all the areas are joined up. And so that, that kind of thing was like quite common, where, a lot of these kind of smaller actions took place and added to the total. And yeah, I mean, it was like, massive number. In fact, that might be an underestimate by David Henshaw of the number of actions that took place. But of course, all that came to an end, because kind of what happened was the state caught up with it all, and brought in these various measures to pretty much crush the ALF. And so the ALF did, the ALF wasn't without success. I mean, I think as a result of ALF activity, the number of experiments on animals here in the UK did go down, and also the fur trade was very much kind of decimated in terms of the retail outlets. All the department stores except Harrods used to have fur departments, and loads of the high street fur shops. The only place now where you can actually buy fur in a kind of high street shop, in a high street store, is in a certain part of London. They exist nowhere else. I mean, I think there are some industrial estates where someone can go and knock on the door and be let into a building and see furs, but these aren't on the high street. These aren't high street establishments anymore. And so that was another area where the ALF action had huge success. But that's kind of where it ended. That's where it ended. And the type of activity that brought about that success these days would no longer be possible for a number of reasons, which I've kind of mentioned already, in terms of the police activity, in terms of the sentences, in terms of the surveillance, in terms of people doing things which were really quite serious in terms of criminality, and then getting away with them. There'd be no way that people would be able to get away with those things like we used to these days. So the kind of, the terrain has completely changed in terms of carrying out.
Okay, to bring it back to the theme, then, you're not suggesting that some people are trying to bring the ALF back in that sense, are you?
I think there are some people that kind of dream of it coming back, that kind of live in this kind of fantasy world of, like, wanting it to come back and wanting people to rise up and start smashing things up again. Yeah, there are some people that kind of want that and hope for that, and kind of, I suppose, in a sense, try to encourage that. Although, as I said, that the way things are is totally against that ever kind of happening. It's just totally impossible that could ever happen again, whether anyone wants it to happen or not. It just isn't. It's just
so even if it was a good idea, it couldn't happen. But also, you got to question whether it's a good idea too. Right?
Well, yes, you see, and I think this is kind of part of what I'm talking about. But it isn't just the ALF. If you look at other campaigns, you look, for instance, like the Shack campaign, to close Huntingdon Life Sciences, and whatever you think about, what difference would that have made if that laboratory had closed? There is that question to be asked. But separate from that, I mean, that, for a long time, that was a very successful campaign in terms of stopping people supplying stuff. The idea was to kind of cut off all the lifelines. It was very clever, cleverly thought out campaign in terms of cut off all the lifelines to the lab, so nobody supplies them with, office equipment. Nobody supplies them with even people that supplied the toilet paper. It got to a stage where nobody even probably wanted to supply them toilet paper, because so much pressure was put on these other companies that supplied them. Nobody wanted to offer them banking facilities, for instance, because of the pressure that the campaign put on all these companies that were supplying or, somehow supporting Huntingdon Life Sciences. But of course, what happened, a similar thing happened where the state stepped in. They offered HLS banking facilities, so they kind of saved them financially. And then they started arresting, people that organised around the campaign. And the same thing happened. There were new laws brought in. Existing laws were used in a way that they were never intended to be used. And a lot of those people were sent to prison for long periods of time. And that campaign came to an end without having achieved its main objective.
But that was to do with criminality, wasn't it? I mean,
that was to do with the.
Couldn't it return without that level of criminality. And so,
well, you see now this is kind of something else that I'm kind of coming on to. So you've got these campaigns. You've got like you've basically got the two types of pressure campaigns. That was a pressure campaign kind of aimed at HLS, like the ALF's kind of pressure campaign was aimed at various companies connected in various ways to the oppression of other animals. But in both cases, and then there was also the Speak campaign, which was aimed at preventing the experiments at Oxford University, I think primarily on primates, and that resulted in, once again, in people being put in prison who are the main orchestrators of that campaign, and that was like another one that was where the state stepped in. So you have situations where the state steps in to protect corporate interests, and so then those campaigns are brought to an end and don't actually succeed, because the aim of the ALF was to bring about animal liberation, just as the name suggests. And although the ALF had some success, it fell massively short, hugely short of actually obtaining animal liberation. And these other campaigns obviously failed to obtain their objectives because of the action of the state. So you've got the state stepping in. You've got the state stepping in to protect corporate business when it looks like campaigns, are succeeding against corporate business. And then you've got campaigns that are directly aimed at pressuring the state. You've got all these marches, demonstrations, stuff like that are kind of aimed at the state, saying that we want the government to make changes. We want the government to bring in laws. You've got petitions to the government to bring in different sorts of legislation, which invariably fail. And you've got you've got protests against various establishments where the kind of real solution to the problem lies actually in legislation, but the type of government we've got and the type of government we've always had is never going to bring in the type of legislation that we kind of actually need to properly protect animals in those circumstances. And if you think all through the years of that type of campaign, that type of pressure campaign aimed at corporate business, and that type of pressure campaign aimed at the government, what have we got to show for it? What have we actually got to show for that way of fighting, for that battle? What have we got to show for that battle? In terms of legislation, what we got? We've got a Hunting Act, which is really weak and is not enforced. All right. We got a ban on fur farms in the UK, but fur products can still be sold and imported and still be sold here. And the other bits of legislation, like we've had to protect those, are tiny compared. I mean, when you think, we have 250 animals slaughtered every second to feed the UK population. I think that is 8 billion a year, and then we've got approaching 3 million experiments on animals every year, and then you've got all the hunting, you've got all the the animal racing, you've got the massive toll on other animals caused by adverse human impacts on the natural world, of which probably the major form of that is the climate crisis. And what are this government doing to combat the climate crisis? That they're authorising more, more drilling for fossil fuels, aren't they? More extraction of fossil fuels, and instead of kind of giving in to any demands of the campaigners and protesters, what's been the result of all that disruption? The result of all that disruption hasn't been to change, how the government behaves. The result of all that disruption has been that they brought in more draconian laws against protest, hasn't it? You see, so this is what we've got. And what's happened? Like we've had this situation of like campaigners banging their heads against a brick wall, and the brick wall is like a kind of a succession of speciesist, human supremacist governments that aren't going to agree to any demands to properly protect other animals. And so all that's getting broken isn't the wall. It's the heads of the campaigners, and indeed the hearts of the campaigners as well. Through that way of like fighting a battle, which kind of long ago was over in terms of how much it could achieve. The maximum really that type of campaigning can achieve has really already been achieved. The height of that type of campaigning was the ALF, and the ALF achieved a certain amount, but that came to an end, and that can never happen again, right? And all that's ever been achieved since that is tiny. I mean, the government's just scrapped some like kind of minor welfare proposals, haven't they, that are going to be brought in, and that they've been scrapped. They're just tiny minor welfare proposals, nothing to do with rights, nothing to do with animal liberation. But people continue to campaign in that way. People continue with these pressure campaigns, people, against these corporate industries that the government is going to protect. People continue to campaign to try somehow to force or persuade a highly speciesist, highly human supremacist governments to make concessions. And then they kind of wonder why that never happens, and why so little changes. And I think, after all this time, we really need to rethink, how we, how we fight for animal liberation, instead of like continually,
Well, you know what we're going to get, Ronnie. I mean, we were both told last week that we've both gone soft. I mean, that they're going to say, well, you don't have the fight now, but it's not. It's not the fight, strategy.
But the fight, however, however angry people may feel, and they want to rail against, the government and rail against these companies, in the cold light of day, the success of that form of campaigning has been extremely limited. And the high point of that success is many, many years ago and can never be repeated. We can never exert the pressure ever again that the ALF exerted. It is impossible to bring that back. That isn't going to happen. So any pressure exerted now is much smaller than that. And so the hope that can somehow make a difference is like, I don't know. It's like so really unrealistic. So what we got to think about is like kind of how, what way do we campaign? And I think the huge mistake we make.
Hang on, Ronnie. Before you develop that theme, let's just go to some comments that have arisen from what you've already said, right? And so first of all, do you think it's actually gone away or moved to more lone wolf style actions rather than campaigns?
I think it's largely gone away. I mean, yes. I mean, there still is ALF style direct action taking place, but it's very small. Number of actions is tiny compared to what it used to be, and it also there are many countries. I mean, the UK used to be, out of all the sort of nations of the world, the UK used to be like the real hotbed of ALF activities, probably particularly England, out of all the countries in the UK, was like where loads of stuff that was like the main, the major place where that ALF actions took place. But now that's not the case, and there are far more actions now in some other countries than there are in the UK. For various reasons. Well, one of them is that a lot of those countries don't have the same level of surveillance we have here. But really, even on a worldwide scale, the amount of ALF activity has kind of largely declined.
Okay, well, you're getting quite a bit of pushback, but let's go through it.
No, that's okay.
Yeah. So Deb says, but isn't there a difference between the actual rescue stroke removal of other animals and economic sabotage stroke pressure?
Well, yes, I mean, like there is a difference, you see, and of course the the ALF did rescue individual animals, and that was great for those individual animals. How often that actually resulted in a kind of net saving of animals' lives is another question, because depending on the circumstances, what would happen if you rescued, say you rescued some animals that were due to be supplied for animal experiments, right? Then the likelihood is that if they, for as long as those experiments continued, then those animals you rescued would just be replaced by other animals. So what was like good for one lot of animals was bad news for another lot of animals, you see. So it wasn't, I mean, there were some circumstances where you could say, yes, those animals were like genuinely saved and wouldn't be replaced. And the example of that would be maybe, raids on battery farms where they tend to kill all the all the hens at once. And so if you take a few out of the cages, they don't replace them. They don't bother.
Yeah, well, they can't. And in fact, sometimes,
they can't,
I mean,
so,
if it was a
but in
broiler unit,
terms
they
of
wouldn't
those
even
animals,
notice, would they?
but how is that going to achieve animal liberation? I mean, it's great, if you're talking about, animal liberation in terms of that being a widespread situation where other animals are no longer oppressed and exploited by humans, then rescuing a few animals here and there from places isn't going to bring that about. It's great for those individual animals, but it's not. It's not. And it's very worthy. It's the same as animal sanctuaries, same as things like hunt saboteurs, for instance, where these are very worthy activities and worthy of support. And you and I, Roger, have both supported those things. We've been involved in those things. We've raised funds for those things. These are very positive and worthy activities, but they're not going to bring about animal liberation. They're great for the individual animals that are rescued, the individual, foxes or whatever, where they're kind of saved from the hunt, or the hunt's prevented from killing. That's brilliant, but that isn't animal liberation. Animal liberation is like a widespread situation.
Well, there's no single activity that's going to bring about animal liberation, but it's a kind of what goes on along the way. And I mean, one thing that Debbie's kind of alluding to, for me at least, is the fact that there would be a big difference in terms of what you could do for the press and therefore public education.
I think this is something I'm coming on to. You see, when the ALF, for me, with the ALF, the most important aspect of the ALF from like my point of view was the damage, because our strategy, our kind of theory of how we'd obtain animal liberation was like, we cause these companies so much damage, they go out of business and they wouldn't be able to operate, and that'd be the end of it. You see, so really, we, I saw, and people that thought like me saw everything in terms of how much damage we could inflict. And so when we looked at animal rescue, it was like what the damage we'd inflicted on them was the value of those animals that they'd lost. You see, and of course that's really tiny compared with the amount of damage you can cause by physically wrecking something. You see, so I always kind of, although I supported the rescue of animals, for me that wasn't the most important thing. The most important thing was the damage, because
it was just very popular.
It was very popular in terms. Yeah, of course, it's going to be more popular in terms of like, I suppose the media, in a sense. You've got
well, what about a modern day pressure campaign now? So we are definitely seeing a resurgence of economic pressure on suppliers, service.
Well, I kind of, but I think it's really quite minor, and it's certainly minor compared to what the ALF did, and it's kind of minor. It's really minor in terms of what SHAC did in relation to HLS, and of course, what is the likely outcome of that? What is historically what happened when people did that, and when people started succeeding with doing that? What happened? Because you had a speciesist government, right, as we have now. The government stepped in and protected these companies, these corporations. So that's what's going to happen again, unless we do something to change the nature of governments. And that's kind of really what I'm coming on to, that instead of like constantly throwing ourselves against the brick wall of like an intransigent government, either in terms of their refusal to bring in legislation to protect other animals, and indeed their support for the oppression of other animals through subsidies they give, and grants they give to various forms of animal oppression, right? There's that, but there's also their support for corporations that come under pressure from animal liberation campaigners. So in my view, instead of like constantly throwing ourselves against the brick wall of speciesist governments, we ourselves have got to think, how can we be the ones in charge? How can we supplant those governments with a government, with an administration that is going to bring about animal liberation, or is going to be certainly favourable to that?
Okay, before you move on to that, then Deb says, I can see what you're saying, Ronnie, but haven't whole social justice movement included political pressure in their campaigns? And I suppose it doesn't necessarily have to be a great deal of criminality there.
No, but you see that. But what I'm saying is the political pressure that's been has been part of the campaign for animal liberation has yielded so very, very little. And so we've kind of we've got to look at whether that's something we should really be continuing to do when it's been, there's been so little success from it in terms of the huge of the huge edifice of the oppression of other animals that we're faced with. All we're doing is like getting, tiny. We're getting tiny crumbs from the table. Now, how long are we going to be? How long are we going to continue with the strategy where that's all we get? Or we're ever likely to get as well from governments that are like kind of totally opposed to the concept of animal liberation. And so the only way that we're ever really going to achieve anything big is by changing the very nature of governments. And so how do you do that? What is the strategy by which we do that? What is the strategy by which we do that?
Well, for me, it'd be changing the culture first. But there's about three comments here from Animal Liberation TV. I disagree with this analysis. The ALF victories were far more far-reaching than your summary. Direct action and pressure campaigns are easily the most progressive and important aspects of the movement. Let me just go through them so you can take them all at once, Ronnie. It is definitely a negative attitude to say that the ALF cannot be strong again. I agree it couldn't happen in the same way, but anything is possible. And then I also argue there wouldn't even be a modern AR movement or vegan movement without the direct action. We made this movement. So there's a lot there. So if you need any of those put back up again, just let me know.
Yeah. Well, in general terms, I think I've been really honest about what the ALF achieved. I mean, the ALF did achieve a considerable amount. I mean, the main successes of the ALF, as I've mentioned, were in reducing the annual number of animal experiments and decimating the fur trade. Yes, that was achieved, and that was, but that is nowhere near animal liberation. When you've got a situation, you've got, we have 250 animals slaughtered every second in this, in the UK, or slaughtered to feed the UK population every second. We still have getting on for 3 million experiments on animals every year. The ALF, achieved a considerable amount, and in terms of success, achieved far more than any other campaign. But that's nowhere near animal liberation. That's a drop in the ocean compared with the mass.
But Ronnie, the response would be, well, door dropping is nowhere near animal liberation.
Yeah, but you see it. But no, it's not. But you see, it depends on what these things lead to. You see, what's happened is like the ALF was kind of like going down a cul-de-sac, that you could make progress so far, and then it was halted. You could go no further. So you've made a certain amount of progress, and this is what I'm saying about fighting a battle that's long ago over, because we've already made, using that form of action, we've already made all the progress we could possibly make, apart from a few tiny morsels, perhaps. We've already made the maximum progress we could make. with that, right?
Well,
We've already done that.
well,
And,
how about if we take the premise, because you're talking about ultimately our target's got to be government, but I've always argued, and people like
target's got to be
Franco,
changing. Our target's got to be changing government.
yeah, but we need a
targeting
change
the
in
government.
culture.
Yeah.
Right. Okay.
And,
So
yeah.
why couldn't a new ALF be part of that?
Well, I think a new ALF could be part of that, but it would have to operate in a different way. And this is kind of what I'm coming on to, right?
Okay.
And I think there is a role that there is a really important role for direct action in achieving like big change, but that direct action would have to operate in a different way. And that's kind of what I'm coming on to. In other words, like, so if we're gonna change like the nature of government, so we've kind of actually got, because we need to be the ones in charge. All the time, we've kind of just accepted they're the ones in charge, and what you do is just put pressure on them and try and force them to change. Right? They're the ones in charge. We've never thought, well, hang on a minute. How about we try to be in charge? How about we work out a strategy by where we're in charge, right? And that's what I believe we should do. And so how do we work, what is that strategy going to be? Well, first of all, why have we got the government we've got? How does that work? And basically what happens is you've got members of parliament elected from the various constituencies, and you've got people in those constituencies that vote for them. And we've got a government, our current government was voted in by 29% of people eligible to vote, right? So by no means, and they won the election by a big majority. So it's by no means everyone voted for them. In fact, most people that voted didn't vote for them. But the way that the election works, they got in by a big majority. So that's kind of that's why it happened. That they haven't they're not empowered by magic. They're there because people voted for them, right? So what you've got to do is you've got to change who the politicians are, and you've got to change how people vote. So you get politicians voted in that are going to do something to protect animals, that are going to be in favour of animal liberation, right? And how do we do that? How do we create that situation, right?
Well,
and I believe
if that is the case, I mean, the pushback here is, really kind of, this is the kind of thing that we'd say in the 1980s.
But the problem is, this is an example of fighting a war or a battle that's long ago over. This attitude is that attitude, and that's the problem. That is really the problem. This is the attitude that's the problem. That type of action has achieved all it's ever going to achieve because of the way things have changed. Don't we learn anything from history? Haven't we learned anything about how the state cracked down on the ALF? Haven't we learned anything from how the state cracked down on Shack or on Speak? Or are we going to continue kind of be like Groundhog Day, where we kind of repeat?
Yeah, so what you're saying really, Ronnie, what you're saying here is it's between us and the, I'm going to say, users. But it's not. It's not because the users
this is the fundamental problem. The fundamental problem the ALF made was that we didn't engage with ordinary members of the public, because at the end of the day, it's ordinary members of the public that just actually have the power to change things and to change things in a really radical way. It's ordinary members of the public who are the voters. This government we've got now were voted in by ordinary members of the public. They weren't imposed by magic. They were voted in, right? And they're voted, and people have voted that way. People voted for them because the way the attitudes of those people, their mindset, right? And those politicians they voted into power, they had their own particular mindset, right? And that's what we've got to change. That's what we've got to change. That's our only hope of ever having any kind of laws that recognise animal rights, that that properly protect animals, that will end things like animal agriculture and the fishing industry, and where we can have widespread animal liberation. It's the only way we can do it, right? So how do you do it? You have to change the way that ordinary people think. You have to change the mindset of ordinary people to achieve that. And you kind of have to do it. You kind of have to do it through vegan education, and when I'm talking about vegan education, I'm not just talking about the diet, because veganism isn't a diet. Veganism is a philosophy of animal liberation, right? So we have to get a lot more people to accept that philosophy.
Well, we've got enough according to this. We have enough vegans. We just need to turn them into.
Well, yes, but you see that, but that's you're not gonna turn those vegans into activists. The way people are active in terms of the ALF, that isn't going to happen. That isn't going to happen. You know, that's we're in a totally different. We're in a totally different setup now. That as soon as that started again, it would be crushed again by the state like it was. Now that's we may think what we like about that, but that's the actual reality of the situation. We've got to take, if we're fighting a war, and I still believe like kind of is a war, it is a struggle. We've got to take into account the strengths of the enemy and what the enemy's likely to do. We can't just charge in, and like some kind of suicide, like a kind of suicide attack thing. We've got to think about strategy and how we actually change things. And that's kind of what I'm trying to do. We need to be the ones in charge. If we're not the ones in charge, we're never ever. If we're not in charge, the people in charge are going to be people that are totally opposed to us. And so how far are we going to get? So we've got to look, how do we get to be the ones that run the show? And the way we get to be the ones that run the show is to have sufficient people who think like us voted into power. How do we do that? You've got to get those people first. You've got to create those politicians first, and you've got to have people to vote for them. How would you do that? You do that by educating more people to be vegan, right? Because first of all, if more people are vegan, you get more vegan politicians, and you'll have more vegans to vote those vegans into power. And so that's the only way we'll do it. That's the only possible way that we can really, really change things in reality. This
is really interesting, because what you're saying is the only possible way is being described as impossible.
Yes, but you see, we've already had the kind of living proof that the ALF was limited in what it could achieve. That's already happened, and we've seen what happened with that. We saw how the state acted against the ALF. We saw how much the ALF achieved, but we've also seen how much it didn't achieve. What it did achieve was only tiny in terms of, the whole edifice of the oppression of other animals. And if we're going to put an end to that, we have to start thinking, how do we gain control ourselves? Because as long as that lot are in control, we're never going to get very far. They're not going to pass any decent laws, and they're going to act
But we're not going to get them out without widespread cultural change. And couldn't the ALF help with that?
Well, I think yes, but in a different way. And this is what I'm coming on to. In terms of what I'm saying is, we have to educate a lot more people to be vegan, so that we change the culture, and through changing the culture, we change the politics. Right? That's what we've got to do. So how do we go about that? Well, we have to persuade a lot more vegans to be involved in vegan outreach, right? And then that's not easy. I mean, expecting someone to become an activist and kind of risk a sentence of imprisonment is a massive ask, when it's hard enough to educate anyone to give out a leaflet, or to persuade anyone to give out a leaflet. But but people are much more likely to do those smaller things that aren't of a risk to themselves. It's much more likely that you're going to be able to educate, persuade someone to do that than to do some kind of really big, really risky, really life-changing action. So the potential really for involving a lot of vegans is in vegan education is real and is there, providing we kind of go about that the right way. And
we're struggling,
and we have to do that. And where direct action comes into that is direct action as an awareness raising exercise, because where direct action was used in the past, it's been as to cause economic loss, to cause economic loss and put these companies out of business, right? And as we saw, what happened was the government stepped in and kind of protected that industry. But that was what we were aimed at. It was economic sabotage, put them out of business, right? That was the aim of the direct action. But I think if direct action had a different aim, that it could be part of this overall effort to actually create like meaningful change. And the role I see, the important role I see direct action as playing is in terms of raising awareness, And we kind of already see examples of this kind of happening. We've seen examples like open rescue, where people take animals out of places. And, this is where rescue once more comes into it again. But but it's rescue that's kind of done in a different way to how the ALF did it. Yeah, the ALF did it to kind of save those animals, but the ALF didn't look at it as to use it as awareness raising, right? But it can be used as awareness raising. You can get a lot of publicity about those activities, and through that publicity, you can spread the vegan message. And we've seen examples of that kind of action. I mean, where the action has been good. We've seen stuff from Animal Rebellion and Animal Rising where they've taken non-violent direct action against the dairy industry, against McDonald's, and rescuing animals from places, particularly animals on farms. The problem though, the problem with Animal Rising and also it seems to be with DXC as well, it isn't those activities. The activities are great and they're kind of can make a big impression because you've got a situation where people aren't trying to get away. One of the problems to revive the ALF as it was, one of the problems people would face is not being able to get away with things. We've got surveillance all over the place. There's cameras on the roads.
I don't think that's been proposed. I mean, this bit resurgent of the ALF, albeit with nuanced approach, which could be what you've just said, right? About it's almost like incorporating.
What I'm saying is that there is a role for direct action, and I think a really important role for direct action, but it has to be very different to what it was in the past, and it has to be seen as an awareness raising exercise, as part of the overall effort to educate people to become vegan. Right. And so if you're doing direct action in that way, it has to be very different to what the ALF did. And I think there are certain kind of ground rules that you kind of have to follow for it. And this is really quite similar to kind of how DXE do it, how Animal Rebellion / Animal Rising have done it in terms of like non-violence. It's really important to be non-violent. You don't have to cause a massive amount of damage because your aim isn't to cause economic loss. Your aim is to raise awareness. Your aim is to create publicity and to raise awareness, right? So people doing it don't have to do things where they face massively long sentences of imprisonment. So people can be there, they can handcuff themselves, they can give themselves up, for arrest and that. And if someone's there saying, "Here I am, I did this, I rescued these animals, I did whatever this was, blocked this gate or whatever. Here I am, I'm not trying to evade my responsibility for anything." That is very strong in terms of awareness raising. That's a very like strong statement, much stronger than like hiding and trying to run away. Which isn't if you've done something that's going to get you 10 years in prison, you're going to want to run away, aren't you? But if it's like something much minor than that, then there isn't so much urgency to do that. And we've seen this. We've seen this in actions that have taken place recently. My only problem with DXC and Animal Rising is their messaging, is that they don't put out a like go vegan message to members of the public in their messaging, and I think that's a huge failing of theirs. But the type of action they do has very often been the type of action we need to have. But I think
what do you think of this one, Ron? Take a lot to convince me that giving out a vegan leaflet is somehow more effective than, say, a home demo outside a lab.
But let's see. If enough giving out one vegan leaflet, I'm not talking about giving out one vegan leaflet. I'm talking about loads of people giving out leaflets, getting a lot of people to go vegan. Those people are voters. Some of those people may become politicians. And so through that, we can change the actual administration in this country to one that is actually favourable to animal liberation.
You're not going to get nicked by doing a home demo, are you?
Well, no. Well, I'm not sure of the law, but you see, let's look at kind of the home demo outside the lab owner's house, right? what you're kind of hoping to achieve by that, you're kind of hoping that the lab owner might say, right, I'm no longer going to do animal experiments, right? Is that kind of what you're hoping to achieve? And maybe that, you know, that possibly might work. But you see, if that starts becoming successful and starts really impacting on the animal research industry, do we really think the government isn't going to take action? Do you really think that the state isn't going to step in and do something about the people that are doing the home demos?
Yeah, but we talked about this last week, Ronnie. If door dropping started to become a threat,
but you see, but what is it? But like, it's kind of so much easier for them to, you know. I mean, I think that home demos might well be unlawful anyway. I'm sure there's a law that I'm sure there's a law they could use to do something about home demos if they kind of wanted to. And we've already seen this with protests, and they're bringing in, you know, new laws against protests and stuff like that, you know, as a reaction to, you know, to disruptive protests. We've already seen that. But, you know, what is the history of that type of action? The history of that type of action is, as soon as it starts getting successful, the state steps in and, you know, and crushes the campaign. You know, how many times do we have to see that before we start thinking, hang on, you know, are we doing something right here, or are we doing something wrong? And the thing is, it's like, you know, it's so much easier for them to take action against something like a home demo than they would against someone just delivering leaflets or having an information. So it'd be such really, really, really difficult for them to criminalize that type of activity, and pretty much impossible. Whereas like a home demo, you're outside someone's home, you know, they could easily like make that criminal, and would move to do so if those things became successful. And you know, that's like unfortunate. I mean, I'm not opposed to demos outside these people's homes whatsoever, but I'm just looking at like the reality of like how the state would operate against those things.
Yeah,
and you're not fundamentally changing the culture of society by doing that, are you? You know, you have to, if we're going to achieve animal liberation, how are we going to achieve animal liberation when most people don't believe in it? When most people are speciesists, when most people are human supremacists, how the hell are we going to achieve it? You know, unless we educate at least a substantial minority of people to believe in animal liberation, we're never going to achieve it. How's it going to happen?
Well, what about this? Making the meat industry uninsurable. He said in 1991, the LF was so successful, the meat industry was becoming uninsurable. That was down to about 40 people.
But has that, you know, did that make any difference to, you know, to the number of animals slaughtered? You know, the number of animals that are killed for
I think the point is, if it had have become uninsurable, then it would make a difference.
Yeah, it would make insurable. But are you going to be? But are you going to be able to get away with that? This is the trouble. I mean, we got away with all sorts back in the day, but you know, you have to kind of, you have to take into account, you know, if you're fighting a war, you've got to take into account what the enemy are doing, and the enemy's strength, and you know what weaponry they've got. If we're going to kind of talk in military terms, which I kind of not, you know, I'm not into, but just for the sake of, you know, of an example, you know, what's going to happen if you did start campaigns like that where like you're causing loads and loads of damage. I mean, one of the reasons that let's look at you know, one of the mistakes that Animal Rebellion made, which has kind of done a lot of harm to their ability to carry out actions. When they took actions against the dairy industry, dairy blockades, right, which was mostly people like chaining themselves to lorries and stuff like that, you know, blockading the dairies, getting on the roof, and you know, these dairies were blockaded for a number of hours. I don't think it like really affected very much in terms of people's consumption of animal products or anything like that, but it obtained a lot of publicity, and hopefully there will be people who've gone vegan through that publicity, although unfortunately they didn't include like a go vegan message in it, you know. And once again, they were making the state of like calling on the government, you know, as a highly sort of speciesist government to somehow, you know, create a plant-based future, which was kind of really naive, I would say. But nevertheless, you and they got a lot of publicity through those things. But they made the huge mistake of drilling tyres on lorries as part of that, and caused hundreds of thousands of pounds worth of damage. And the result of that, there's quite a number of people on serious conspiracy charges, which kind of knocked them out of action. It was a huge tactical error to do that, because they would have been able to obtain just as much publicity and just as much coverage and create just as much awareness without doing that, with keeping to mind, smaller, lower level of criminality. And that's the example I've given. What they did was, by doing that, they gave the state an opportunity to move in and take strong action against them, because they took that type of damage action as part of that campaign. And that's just an example of like how you've got to keep this at, the level of criminality at like really low level to be able to kind of have a sustainable campaign like that. And if people started doing huge amounts of damage to the meat industry, they'd just all be arrested, put in jail. That'd be the end of it. That's the reality of it. It's sad. It's sad that that's the case, and I wish that weren't the case. But we have to be realistic about how the state's going to.
Is one of the things that you're saying, Ronnie, and I think it is that if there was no alternative, we'd have to do that. But now there is.
Well, I think there always has been. You see, I think there always has been.
We didn't kind of know, did we?
But we didn't know, and I think had vegan outreach started way back, and had the kind of type of direct action that was taken way back, been one of awareness raising to spread the vegan message, I do think that despite the successes of the ALF, I do think we'd be further on now in terms of like actually really creating fundamental change in society. Because unless we have cultural change, how are we going to get animal liberation when most people don't believe in it? How's that ever going to be possible? It's not, is it? It's just like and how do we get people to believe in it? We'll only get people to believe in it through education. It's the only way we're going to do it.
If you were to kind of put yourself back in the day, 1976 or something, and the idea was to use the ALF as a tool for cultural change and then societal change as you're seeing it now. What would that have increased? Well, I know there's kind of problems with this, but would that increase the number of rescues over damage, and the damage bit would be seen as, it's difficult to educate based on that, and so, what I'm getting at there, yeah.
It kind of depends. I mean, you can have damage that's kind of symbolic. I mean, like for instance, if you're kind of talking about, say, animal experimentation. I mean, my wife Louise took part in an action against the Sequani lab, or at the Sequani lab in Ledbury, where they sprayed slogans with like chalk-based paint that was eco-friendly and easily washed off. And it made a lot of a mess, and it kind of, it looked good, and they handcuffed themselves to the gates and they're arrested by the police. And, that got a considerable amount of publicity. It was, I think it got on the BBC News and certainly like in the region, it got a lot of publicity, to raise awareness of animal experiments and that kind of thing. But they didn't do any serious damage. The damage the damage is that they've been charged with is like £500, and even that's in dispute because it wasn't that much at all. This was chalk paint, but it looked good, and so I think that kind of level of direct action, where you're doing that kind of awareness raising, low level criminality direct action, that a lot of people will feel able to take part in.
Well, you say it looks good, right, Ronnie? But I mean, some people would just see that as vandalism, wouldn't they?
Well, some people would, but you see, it's just a question of like how you kind of. But you see, you can't, you can't just rely on taking animals out of places, because first of all, taking animals out of a place can be a much more complicated operation. And secondly, where are they going to go? Where are who's going to take these animals? Our rescues going to take. We've got a situation where rescues are kind of chock-a-block. So the ability to use animal rescue as a form of awareness raising is quite limited. And so if you're going to use direct action as a form of awareness raising, you've got to employ other forms of direct action apart from just animal rescue. And so that low level kind of symbolic type of stuff, yeah, I mean, yes, there'd be some people who go, "Oh, that's damaged," but you know,
But
those
people
people
like animal rescue, so that would be a good
yeah,
education.
people would like animal rescue, but the number of actions you could do just with animal rescue would be fairly small, because
Because of the home situation and all the
because of the
stuff.
home
Yeah,
situation,
yeah.
and also like it's much easier to go up to a place and make a bit of a mess with some chalk paint and glue yourself or lock yourself and get some publicity. Even if that's local publicity, there's tens of thousands of people are going to see that, maybe more than that. That's a really simple thing to do. If you're rescuing animals from a place, it's a much more complicated operation and lots of factors. For a start, you've got to get the animals away. You see, if you're doing that kind of action where you're going to kind of lock yourself to the gate or something, you're not trying to get away. But if you're rescuing animals, it's absolutely vital that those animals get away. So, like in a sense, like most of your planning is about how do we get the animals away, isn't it? Whereas if you don't have to think about that, it's a much easier action to carry out. And so I think you can't just rely, if you're going to use direct action as awareness raising, you can't just rely on animal rescue.
Well, I mean, it's interesting really, because we've got two kind of different narratives and almost like two different histories being played out here. But first of all, just on this one, which is interesting. Open rescue has hit the headline, but makes it easier for police to identify activists compromising future actions. Now, I think that the place with the most longevity in terms of open rescue would be Australia with Patty Mark, and I don't think they've all ended up in.
Well, I think the thing is that you see that is the same as I mean, if you do if you do actions where you try to get away, then like if those actions are kind of serious enough, you're not going to get away, because they're going to get you because of surveillance and because of the effort they'll put into it. That's the reality of it. So your chances of being kind of caught for like some kind of direct action that caused serious damage is just as likely as for an open rescue, except that for an open rescue, the type of sentence you're going to receive is going to be much, much less. And also the publicity, the awareness raising that comes out of it is going to be much greater, because you're there, you've rescued animals, you're not running away saying, yeah, I rescued these animals and that's the reason why. And so you're going to be able to have much more of a voice in explaining. They're going to be able to speak to you directly, aren't they, the media, to the people who actually did the rescue. So there's all sorts of advantages in that in terms of awareness raising.
Okay, so in terms of this other kind of history, 1995, the Justice Department stopped live exports through the old ports. Barry Horn's campaign helped Boots sell their labs.
But the point is, I'm not denying that there were victories associated with direct action, and indeed they were. I mean, I say that the ALF actions resulted in a considerable reduction in animal experiments of like several million every year, and I think if it wasn't for the ALF, the number of animal experiments we have now would probably be a lot greater. And I think probably, although the Shack campaign, for instance, didn't succeed in its main objective to close down HLS, I think it still probably contributed to a reduction in animal experiments. But these things are tiny. These things are tiny compared with the edifice of of the oppression of other animals. When you consider that that 8 billion are slaughtered to feed people in
the bit that interests me here is Barry Horn's campaign helped Boots sell their labs. Well, that means that they sold their labs to somebody else who's going to
their lab was initially bought by another company that carried on doing animal experiments. I'm not sure whether animal experiments take place now, whether the place is even there now, but I know the company that bought it off Boots was another.
It's really interesting because this I mean, today's program has been an echo of all the kind of debates that have gone on for years about.
The thing is that closing these places down, right? The problem is, right, that if you close if you close a place down that supplies animals for experiments, right? But your campaign has no effect on the number of experiments that take place. All that's going to happen, sadly, is those animals are going to be supplied from somewhere else, you see. And kind of what was the end result of that campaign? You know, Hillgrove, Consort, Shamrock, and all these places. That ended up with a campaign, shut campaign against Huntingdon Life Sciences, right? And what happened then? The government stepped in and said, right, enough is enough. You've already closed all these places. We can't have this to continue because this is like a domino effect, and who's going to be next? And so we're going to stop. We're going to step in now, and we're going to stop you. And that's what happened. And even closing HLS, you know, would that have spared any animals? You know, just the mere act of closing it. It's a contract research laboratory, and what's happening is so companies are paying HLS to test their products for them, right? You close down HLS, all that is all the other contract research laboratories are thinking, great, that's brilliant, that's more work for us, because then what happens is the companies that previously used HLS will just use another contract research laboratory, and you know, there'll be no reduction in the number of animals used for experiments, you know, and this is the problem, that, you know, this is the kind of like reality of that. And I know people are going to say, yeah, but we carry on, we close that one, and the next one, and the next one, and the next one. How long is that going to take? And at what stage is the state going to step in and saying, hang on, we're not having this anymore? You know, we're going to put a stop to you. And that's what happens. You know, and that's the kind of that's the reality of that. Unless we tackle things at a deeper level, and we actually change the government to one that isn't going to keep repressing, you know, animal liberation activists and keep, you know.
What's been said is the ALF has provided tangible victories. Outreach hasn't.
Well, the thing about yeah, but you see, but the ALF could never do what its name implied. The ALF could never achieve animal liberation. Yeah, the ALF had some victories, but the chance of repeating those victories is gone because of how things have changed, right? And also, the victories that the ALF achieved and the impact it had was only tiny, really, if you look at the vast edifice of the oppression of other animals. You know, and so how are we going to actually tackle that whole evidence? How are we going to actually bring about animal liberation? That's the question we need to ask. And the thing about the no change in animal consumption. Well, one of the reasons why the consumption of animal products is going up is, well, there's several reasons. First of all, the population's getting bigger, and secondly, it's to do with other countries that previously mainly you know, ate diets that were very low in animal products. They're adopting a more Western diet, aren't they? Unfortunately, so they're eating more animal products. That's right. But the answer to that is, you know, how are you going to end the consumption of animal products unless you educate people to go vegan? How, you know, what other way are you going to do it? You know, how are we going to do this if ever we're going to bring about widespread animal liberation? There is only one way we can do it. We can't do it without changing the culture. You know, I'm back to saying what I've said all along. If the vast majority of people don't believe in animal liberation, we're not going to get it. How is that going to happen? Because those people are the voters. Those people determine the type of government we've got, and the type of government we've got will determine largely, you know, what degree of animal the oppression of other animals we've got, won't it? As it has done all along.
Yeah, so and I think Andy said something similar to what Amber's saying here. It's disheartening when a lot of vegans are content just to be in the vegan bubble and eat vegan cake, etc. So I think Andy was saying it's not the people who are willing to do the outreach that are a problem. It's not the people who are willing to do the pressure campaigns that are the problem. It's the people who are willing to not willing to do anything.
Yeah, and I think there's a huge kind of rider that goes with all of this is that the kind of overarching, you know, we're talking about what strategy, you know, we're fighting a war, say, and we're talking about, you know, what strategy do we employ to gain victory, right? That's what we're looking at. We all want animal liberation. We all want the same thing, but how do we go about achieving it You know, what strategy will yield it, right? So that's what we're talking about. But you know, even the people that are involved in pressure campaigning, at least they're active, at least they're doing something active. Whereas we know that the vast majority of vegans or people who call themselves vegans aren't active in any way. So that is so in a sense, that's the kind of number one problem. The number one problem isn't really what type of action people take. The number one problem is really that not enough people take any sort of action. In fact, because you know, things have changed greatly. Like, because you know, we come from a time, don't we, Roger, back in the 70s and 80s and that, and most people.
I wasn't there, mate. You're not saying.
Well, the thing is, you see consistent animal liberations, but you see, in reality, you know, the amount of animal liberations you're going to get is kind of limited by other factors, and I think this is the problem. And I think, you know, the idea of like kind of, you know, taking animals out of place as an awareness raising exercise I think that's very powerful. I think that's very powerful. But I think there's a limit on how much you can do that. And so that's why I'm saying that if you were going to use direct action as part of awareness raising you'd have to do other things apart from, you'd have to do occupations and lock-ons and stuff like that, as well as the animal liberation, you know, the animal rescue activities, in order to kind of, you know, create enough actions. But I think
here's a question, Ronnie. Are you really saying that the people, the modern day people involved with pressure campaigns, should be giving out the leaflets instead? Is that what you're saying ultimately?
Well, I'm not really saying to any individual person what they should do. I'm talking about an overall strategy. I'm saying that kind of.
Okay, so if that type of person did that type of thing, would that be a benefit then?
Well, we need. What I'm saying is the only way we're going to achieve, you know, widespread animal liberation is through vegan education, and a lot more vegan education. That's the only way that we're really going to do that at a fundamental level, you know. So whatever else people are doing, whatever else people want to do, it's like an unless, really. It's like an unless. You know, there's all sorts of people that do things to help other animals in their own way, and there's people running rescues, and there's people doing all sorts of stuff. But I think unless we get a sufficient amount of vegan education, we won't achieve animal liberation, because that's the only way we'll fundamentally achieve it. You know, and it's obviously up to vegans to do that vegan education, because they're the only people that can do it. So kind of what we need is a huge move to encourage more vegans to get involved in outreach. You know,
now, this is an interesting comment. You say the change wasn't enough, but if a handful of people reduced experiments by half and made the meat industry uninsurable and fur is largely off the streets, that is real change. Now, I think your position is, yeah, but we can't go back.
Yeah, I agree. You know, the ALF achieved a great deal, but what I'm saying, we're not going to be able to recreate that. We're not going to be able to take that further. You know, how is that ever going to happen? As it was, it was largely crushed by the state as it was. You know, we're now at a later time where the kind of the sort of operation of society is so very, very different. We've got surveillance cameras everywhere. How are we ever going to bring into existence a movement like the ALF once was? That isn't. Yeah, we might want to. You know, I'd love it if there was like loads of people storming everywhere and, you know, destroying all the industries of animal oppression so they couldn't operate, and that's how we do it. I'd absolutely love it if that could happen, but I know that that's not possible. The reality of that is no longer possible. What is possible is we could get a lot of people doing loads of people doing low level actions that all add up together, that change the culture and therefore change the politics. I think that's difficult. Yeah, that's difficult enough to achieve that. But I think it's much more, you know, that is more realistic than hoping that somehow we can have some sort of revival of the ALF that will be even more effective than the ALF was at its height all those years ago.
Well, I mean, this one's an interesting one. I think this one kind of teases out a difference between me and you, Ronnie, because I don't see any potential for political campaigning until we've got widespread cultural change. So that's where I would start. And then I agree with you then that if you want to use direct action like the ALF as a means to create publicity that would create that kind of cultural change, then that's one thing. I also agree that if you went back to that, we're all going to end up back in prison. So
you see, I don't think I'm really all that much different to you, really, in my position now. That I'm not really. That I've come to realise that if we're going to get political change, we've got to start. We've got to kind of really focus on creating a lot more vegans, because otherwise, no political party is going to. I mean, for instance, I for a long time I was involved in the Green Party. I still am to a certain, extent. Really like with, my local party a little bit. But you see,
is there any point, Ronnie?
Well, in my local party, we've got a councillor who's vegan, and I, will help distribute her newsletters, because I'd sooner that she was elected than a bloody Tory who would be elected if she wasn't. So it's kind of really on that level, and that's the extent of my involvement. Because
what impact can she have on the Green Party?
Well, she can't have an impact on the Green Party, but she can have an impact as a local councillor in trying to do things like locally, in terms of doing things locally on the local authority. It's very limited. She's not going to have an impact.
Very limited. You're right.
But you see, I kind of came to the conclusion that and I was involved in kind of bringing, helping to bring in policies. I mean, the Green, you look at the Green Party's policies on animals. The Green Party would totally end animal experimentation. It would kind of move. It would do what Animal Rebellion are asking, which is kind of move the country to a plant-based diet. It would end the fur trade. It would end zoos, animal circuses, all these things. That's all. They've got all these policies, great on paper, but they don't promote them in any way. They're given no priority, and the reason for that is because they're still a human-centric, human supremacist party. And so, if you're ever going to really change that, you're not going to change that. The only way you do that is create more vegans and have more vegans involved in politics.
Why? I mean, presumably there's a reason they don't publicise, and probably because I think it's not workable. So why have those policies in the first place if they don't think they're any good?
Well, because I think it's like any, with any political party, there'll be people working on policy and trying to bring the policies in, and it's just that they don't give those policies any, kind of any priority, and that's the problem. And no political parties give really any priority to. I mean, the Labour Party, when Tony Blair got elected, they put out a document, didn't they? A glossy document about all the things they were going to do.
It's all about animal welfare, though, wasn't it?
It was always animal welfare, and that was a vote catcher, and a load of those things. I mean, the reason why Barry Horne went on hunger strike was because Labour promised a royal commission to look into animal experimentation, and then they reneged on that. So, it was a thing that was kind of, to a large extent not worth the paper it was printed on, because it was just.
I looked at that in my PhD because it was so sad that you ended up with an animal rights, an animal liberationist on strike because some failed welfare thing, So
I mean, absolutely. And so really you've got to kind of operate, and until we create a lot more vegans, none of these political parties are ever going to,
Is Luke right here or not? We can't win this war based solely on outreach.
Well, no, but you see, outreach is a vital component to it, because we'll never win the war unless we'll never get animal liberation unless a lot more people believe in it.
So what you're saying is outreach plays an important role, and more than that, the outreach part of it is now. This is when it should be increased, the outreach part. So it's not going to be the sole thing. It's just that at the moment, it's the most important thing.
I'm not saying that other things that people do to protect animals aren't valid and aren't valuable, but unless we have massively more outreach, we're never really going to get anywhere in terms of achieving large scale
So
animal
it would be
liberation.
better then, in your view, it would be better for everybody at MBR Acres to start doing this instead.
Well,
I
mean,
know,
yes,
I know you've got this thing, you don't want to tell people what to do, but that would be the best thing, wouldn't it?
Yes, yeah. I mean, yeah. I'd say yes if those people, did, because you kind of, you have people where someone's standing outside the laboratory with the board and only a few people see them. The people inside the lab aren't going to take any notice of it. They don't give a shit. And you think, well, if those people spent that time door dropping instead, and made a few more people vegan, that's all part of, that all adds up to the numbers, doesn't it? And that's a kind of, almost certainly a more effective use of their time. I think one of the problem is that different people for some reason get attracted to different forms of action, and I think the struggle against animal experimentation does attract a lot of people for some reason. Maybe it's associated with torture or something like that. But I think what needs to be remembered is that a lot of the ways in which animals are farmed and even fish pulled out of the ocean, that equally equates to torture, doesn't it, as well?
Yeah.
So kind of what I say to people, I wouldn't say to people, look, give up your pressure campaign and give up that. But what I kind of tend to say is, can you incorporate vegan outreach into your campaign? You see, for instance, I've done stalls to kind of collect signatures for these petitions to kind of end animal experiments, replace animal experiments with non-animal methods. These government petitions where, here in the UK, if you get 100 on these special government petitions, if you get 100,000 signatures, it leads to debate in Parliament. And I've done stalls collecting signatures for those things. Now, not that I have really any hope that, and when they have been debated in Parliament, the government haven't done anything.
Now, the thing is, though, have you done that in order to be able to talk to people about veganism, or?
Well, no, when I've done that, I mean, that does educate people.
So you think that part of it is a waste of time? You're just doing it for something else.
I think educating people. I mean, a lot of people think that experiments on animals have stopped. Don't believe it's still going on. And there are things that people can do in their own lives to kind of have some impact on animal experiments. I mean, if people support those organisations that are promoting non-animal methods, and if people are boycotting these charities that fund experiments on animals, like British Heart Foundation and Cancer Research UK, people are educated to do that. Yeah, if enough people do that, that could have effect in reducing the number of experiments by depriving the experimenters of funding. So there are a few things ordinary people can kind of do and be educated, but ordinary people aren't going to do that if they think that animal experimentation no longer goes on. And a lot of people do think that, and so that is an educational thing. You're educating people to take some kind of effective action. But you see, what I always do, when I do those stalls, I'll give people, when people kind of sign the petition and stuff, I'll give them, as well as the information about animal experiments, I'll give them information about veganism, as well, because why not? You might as well. They care about some animals. They've signed a petition to protect animals in laboratories. So, give them information about veganism as well. So that's the way in which these two things can do it together. And that I'd say, say to people that are kind of into, for different people that, different types of the oppression of other animals are the thing they focus on. Like there are people very focused on campaigning against hunting, for instance. But I'm not going to say to them, look, stop campaigning against hunting. What I would say to them is see if you can look to see how you can incorporate vegan education into your campaign. I mean, an example I always give is for about 13 years, Louise and I ran a campaign against the dog racing industry. And it was really was it really was quite a successful campaign. I mean, we played a part in actually closing down quite a lot of dog tracks through people constantly going outside demonstrating outside the tracks. But you see, the reason those tracks closed was really through education, not through pressure, because we were educating people not to go in. We were educating people about what happened to the dogs and saying to them, just, if you go into this place, you're supporting it, so don't go. And because people stopped going because they've been educated, that was a major factor in these places going. So that was an educational campaign. People might think, oh, that was a pressure campaign, but it wasn't. It was an educational campaign. And so, but what we did was on our website, on the first page of our website, we had a big section about veganism that said, dog racing isn't the only way that other animals are oppressed and exploited. And if you want to stop all of it, then go vegan, and here's how you do it, and we even had stuff on our leaflets like that as well, that took people to a web page where they could learn about veganism. So we incorporated that. We were kind of running what might be called a single issue campaign against the dog racing industry, but we incorporated vegan education into that campaign. So I think that can be done. And so I'm not saying people, to stop campaigning against the thing that really gets to you, but try and incorporate vegan education into your campaign.
Yeah, well, this is an interesting one. We could do a show on this because, you see, I mean, one downside of the vegan education side of it, Ronnie, is the fact that most vegans don't know what veganism is at the moment. And so what kind of vegan education are they going to do?
Well, yeah, and I think that's we've spoken before about outreach and inreach. Where outreach, you're educating non-vegans to go vegan, and inreach is where you're educating people who consider themselves vegan what veganism really is. And I think that probably the major problem is where people think it's, that there are a few ways in which people get it wrong with regard to what veganism is. But I think the major areas where people consider it just as a diet, when obviously it's not, it's a philosophy. And if people consider it just as a diet, we're not going to attain animal liberation through people who consider it just as a diet. No, we're not. It may make some difference in terms of the number of animals that are oppressed. I mean, obviously, if loads of people adopted a vegan diet, that would have an impact on the meat industry and the dairy industry, and that would result in animals being spared. But that wouldn't be animal liberation. In order to achieve animal liberation, we have to have a lot of people believe in it, and they're not going to believe in it if they think veganism is just a diet. So, that's a major area where we have to educate people who consider themselves to be vegan what veganism really is. No,
yeah, there's actually some interesting gendered points being made in the chat, but I'm not quite sure we can get around to those. But it is quite interesting, this kind of
this
idea,
is an
because
interesting one, isn't it?
Yeah.
I kind of don't really think so. I mean, my wife's big into direct. She's big into the awareness raising direct action, and she's kind of tends to be focused on animal experiments because for her that's the kind of thing, as like it is with a lot of people, that kind of, and that that's fine, but there were loads of really good women activists in the ALF. I think they're maybe not so well known as the men because they tended not to be caught so much. They're probably more skilled at avoiding arrest than the men. But no, by no means is ALF type direct action
smarter
exclusive.
than your average bear.
Yeah.
So, okay, this is actually kind of created quite an interesting debate. It is. Yeah. I mean, this is the point that we made ourselves. Yeah.
We have really got to think about strategy, and it's good that there's a debate, and it's kind of good. Yeah, exactly. Well, exactly. Yeah, there were and other ones as well. Other ones as I mean, Sue Smith, who was one of the founders of the ALF. Well, she was a founder of the.
Well, it's interesting, isn't it, Ronnie? Because you've been able to kind of out some of the women who were involved in the early days, but not until they, as it were, passed away.
Because they're dead, because they never got. There was a brilliant woman activist in the East Midlands called Sue Merrikin, who kind of organised some brilliant stuff, and she sadly passed away many years ago. And she was brilliant, there's women have played just as big a role as men in it, absolutely. And for some reason it's kind of the men that tend to be the kind of most well known, I suppose, but that doesn't really reflect of how it was.
I mean, I think this comes back to, and you can understand where it comes from, a kind of feminist or feminist inspired critique of the image of the ALF, and of course I know you've got the thing about, well, that was just to hide your face during the press thing and all that. So, but you can see from a feminist point of view, the ALF kind of looks macho, right?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of those pictures of people in balaclavas, quite a lot of them are actually women, although you may not know.
Oh yeah, and I know that it's more to do with what the cultural message would be rather than
I think that because it's kind of hard, like you know. I can kind of see that, but in reality, I think women were equally represented and equally as kind of prominent and played as much a part in it as men. So that's the actual reality.
Oh yeah, but you're talking about the reality, and I think what's being talked about here is what it looked like, and what kind of image it kind of portrayed, and it was very kind of gendered, and the black clothes, the balaclavas, and all that is and so even though a lot of those people were women, the actual image of the ALF was quite kind of macho and kind of all that.
I think where it portrayed a sort of militaristic image. I mean, I think one of the problems is that really on ALF raids people didn't wear balaclavas. I mean, I only ever wore a balaclava once on a raid, and that was because it was being filmed by a film crew. But normally, where the balaclavas come into it is where people are posing afterwards with animals and stuff. They're wearing the balaclavas or ski masks, more accurately.
All right, okay. I'm going to put this one up because I kind of got that wrong. Yeah, so thanks for putting me right on that. In terms of gendered norms, I'm talking about all the references to direct action as a solution. Yeah, okay. I take that point.
Yeah.
That is a good one to make.
Well, I think you see, I mean, I see direct action as playing a role. I see the fundamental, the fundamental thing we have to do a lot more of if we're going to achieve animal liberation is vegan outreach. Unless we do enough vegan outreach, we won't achieve animal liberation. I think that's the kind of baseline. Right, because how are we going to achieve animal liberation unless we change the basic mindset of a considerable number of people to believe in it? How's that going to happen? It's not, is it? It's going to be impossible. So vegan education in terms of like veganism being a philosophy of animal liberation is like absolutely vital and fundamental.
It's more to do with the view that you can get enough people in direct action that you can bypass the public in the same ways that we thought that was.
We thought that. This is, you see, I believed that, and that was like kind of how the strategy was formed, and the idea of economic sabotage, that we can, this is a war we can win. We can cause so much damage to all these places that they'll just go under. And places did close. We did close laboratories down from constant attacks. Places were closed down. We closed the guinea pig breeder down just by taking some guinea pigs. They closed down because they were so frightened that people knew where they were.
You can really see it. You can see the limitations of what was going on, just through the lens of supply and demand, right?
Yeah, because you see, but yes, that kind of did. We did do that, but it's like kind of. It is nevertheless the case that, in a society where the vast number of people within that society are speciesists to human supremacists and don't believe in animal liberation, how are we going to achieve it? Because when you've got that vast majority, that is going to be reflected in the government you've got. And as soon as anyone starts becoming really successful in kind of bringing down a major area of the oppression of other animals, the government is going to act to crush that movement. And that is what's happened. And that's history.
Yeah. Okay. So if somebody had asked Ronnie Lee in the 1980s that question, what would you have said as an answer?
Well, I'd have said, no, we'll. I mean, my belief then was that we could just, we could kind of just carry on. We could just kind of keep putting these places out of business until there was none of them left. And if there are no vivisection laboratories, there's going to be no vivisectionists there, and then we move on to the, to the
Then we
meat
moved to
industry.
France and
If
closed
there were
all
no
their
slaughterhouses, that no animals would be slaughtered, and so on and so on and so forth, And we were on a roll, because I think what happened was we got away with it for a long time. The state took a while to kind of gear up and to think, well, this was a new thing and people had never done it before. And kind of we got away with loads of stuff. I mean, the ALF Supporters Group newsletter used to blatantly raise funds for buying, bolt croppers and crowbars, and people could give a donation and they could get a picture of the crowbar, a picture of the raid on which the crowbar you sponsored was used. It's just crazy, and we just got away with all this stuff. But then the state caught up. They thought, hang on a minute, there's this new threat. Let's all get together. We'll have meetings with the police, and we'll all kind of, how do we counter this? What strategy do we employ to stop these people? And in the end, they did. And you can see the same happening. And the same's happening with Animal Rising. They've done the same. They got away with a load of stuff at the beginning. Now they're not. Now they're busting into the safe houses and all stuff like that. Now, because they've caught on to how they operate. And that's what they'll do. They're not, if it's a new thing, they're not going to be able to cope with it straight away. It's new. They've got to suss it out, work out how it works, and then move it.
Is that what you see is happening? Even though Animal Rising is nowhere near what the LF was.
Yeah, it's happening. It definitely is happening. Yeah, they've sussed out. I mean, the major failing of Animal Rising is its centralized nature. You see, I'd say if we are going to have a new type of direct action, which I think would have an important role in changing the culture, right? And that would be this kind of direct action aimed at awareness raising, right? If we're going to have that, then it has to be done in a decentralized way, because otherwise, if people are waiting around, and it has to be done autonomous, it has to be autonomous like the ALF was, because if people are waiting around to receive orders from someone on high, first of all, that limits the number of actions you're able to carry out. And secondly, all the state's got to do is take the leadership out, and that's the end of it, you see. And Animal Rising are in grave danger of that happening to them, because it's a hierarchical organisation. So it has to be done. So I see something.
Ronnie, there's no other type now in the movement. I mean,
no, there isn't.
AV is the same.
You see, if the maximum number of whatever we're doing in terms of action, if it's direct action, or even if it's something like outreach, right, you get the maximum amount of action through autonomy. You get the maximum amount of action through decentralization, and through encouraging people to do things themselves by having a do-it-yourself culture. That is why the ALF spread so widely and so quickly and did so much, because it would do it yourself. People weren't given orders from anyone from on high. There was some simple principles to abide by, and then they just went and did it. And that's what enabled it. And it also is the ALF survived 30 years as a highly active organization, if that's the way you could describe it. And one of the main reasons it did, or perhaps the one main reason it did, was because of its decentralized nature, because there was no big chief giving orders that everyone will wait. I'm waiting for the order to come through from on high. People just did it themselves.
No, so nobody would go around in the ALF call themselves the general now, would they?
They'd taken out the leadership. Like I was dubbed as the general. Oh, he's the general. He's in charge of everything. We'll give him 10 years. It didn't stop stuff. Stuff just carried on pretty much the same. Because the reality of it was, I wasn't giving people orders. I wasn't telling people what to do. They were doing it themselves. So putting me in jail, putting the other people in jail like yourself and, the others that, that were given these kind of leadership ranks by the police, that made no difference, because it didn't operate like that.
Well, it did work with Shaq though, didn't it?
Yeah, because they had a leadership. There were certain key people in Shaq that ran it. You know, and it's the same with animal rights. All they've got to do is take those people out. That's the end of it. And this is what they're doing, you know. And it's like you have to have, if you're going to do anything that's against the law, even if it's in a minor way against the law, you have to have like autonomous, decentralized, organized. And I'd argue even if you're within the law, because how do we get the maximum amount of vegan outreach? Right, we get that by having a lot more people organizing it and instigating it in their own areas, right? And if those people are all waiting around to be told what to do by some big organization, then you're not going to get very much of it. People, you know, we have to somehow encourage people to use their own initiative again, like used to be the case.
Well, I agree with that, because that might get around this problem, because this is a real problem here, in the sense that you know, you do have I'm not sure we need leaders, but I think that the idea that the solution is just to get more vegans out there, because most vegans seem to have a pretty reduced thing. I mean, you said the main problem was the people who regard veganism as a diet. I think it's equally damaging for the animals only people who've got so much influence in the movement, and especially the people on the right who kind of seem to hate human beings. That they quite like kind of you know, hierarchical structures. They're into AV and Urofsky and all the rest of it. So those people are as much of a threat to veganism as the diet people, it seems to me.
Well, I think the thing is, I think one of the things that's happened is people, you know, there are a lot of people that kind of go on the AV stuff and they're kind of waiting for the call. You know, I'm you know, waiting for like a cube to be arranged somewhere. And those people don't really live in the places where those things take place. You know, that most of these events take place in the center of big cities.
But it's waiting for the call that's the problem, Ronnie.
They're waiting for the call. You know, whereas if a lot of those people thought, well, I can organise outreach myself, it's like really, really simple. You know, how difficult is it to get some leaflets and put them through people's letterboxes? How difficult is it to you know, to kind of go to like a community event and organise a stall. These things aren't complicated; they're not difficult. But like, and people need to be encouraged to do that, not encouraged to like, you need to sign up to this centralised organisation and pay like 50 quid for a t-shirt and, you know, that kind of thing. I mean, is that discouraging what we really want? Is that encouraging people to think in this like kind of centralised way when we want people to think for themselves? No. I mean, there's loads to learn. There's loads to learn.
Nazi sign that you've got to do as well.
There's loads to learn. You know, there's loads to learn for the modern movement from the ALF and the way the ALF was organised. Now, you know, I've talked about how the ALF had limitations in terms of like achieving animal liberation because it wasn't an awareness. It didn't exist to raise awareness. But I think there's a lot to learn from how the ALF operated structurally, by how autonomous it was, by how people were encouraged to organise things themselves and they didn't have to wait for orders to come, you know, but its decentralised nature. I think there's, you know, that is like a really important model for pretty much everything we do. It's certainly a model for direct action. If you're gonna kind of try and do the maximum awareness raising direct action, and you want to kind of avoid the organisation being taken down.
The difficult question, Ronnie, is have groups like AV become successful because people are not autonomous nowadays, and so they need to be told what to do. It's not a question of the fact that they've just been conned or something. You've got all these people who would normally be doing this and doing that and all that, and then suddenly they get suckered into this because they're not doing anything until
yeah. I think there's been a, you know, like a cultural change in society. I mean, if you go back to like the 70s into the 80s, for instance, a very do-it-yourself culture. I mean, it's the time of punk, wasn't it? It was do-it-yourself music, people in, you know, garage bands and stuff like that. You know, there was this do-it-yourself kind of atmosphere about things, and that was when the ALF proliferated. There was also a lot of local animal rights groups that sprang up. All right, they might not have been doing really any vegan outreach, but they were doing other stuff related to animal rights. You know, a lot of those groups were autonomous groups that people set up. You know, they weren't part of a bigger organization. So you had this kind of atmosphere of autonomy throughout society then, which has faded away. We've had governments that have kind of sort of worked to crush the spirit of that. I think starting with Margaret Thatcher and successive governments where they've kind of tried to crush that type of attitude as well.
Well, we talk about neoliberalism, aren't we?
Neoliberalism,
really?
yes, yeah. You see, so you know, there's kind of cultural reasons why I think young people aren't really quite the same as they used to be, and I think there's kind of it's more difficult now for them to operate autonomously. But you see, it's an unless, and unless we're not going to achieve animal liberation unless unless a certain thing happens. We're not going to achieve animal liberation unless, you know, a large number of people are educated to believe in it. And that means a large number of people need to be educated to become vegan in terms of, you know, the correct interpretation of what veganism is. Right. So in order to do that, we need outreach. We need much more outreach.
Yeah, I get all that. Yeah. I mean, this from Animal Liberation TV, it's almost like a bit of a time warp here, because I mean, this is almost like something that could have been said in the 80s and 90s.
Yeah, but the reality of that's exactly what I believed, and this is what I'm saying about people fighting a war that's long ago over.
And where's this declining investment going to come from?
This is exactly what I believed. But the reality of the situation proved that I was wrong. The actual reality of what actually happened in terms of the state crushing the movements, right? And the reality of, you know, how society has changed in subsequent years, that makes it much more difficult for that type of action to be revived for quite a number of reasons.
Do you think, Ronnie, there's a terrible social psychology here, because you've analysed what you did back then, and what you felt and what you said and all that, and you've analysed it, seen the mistake, and you've said, I was wrong. Do you think, on the other hand, there's a lot of people who don't really be able to say that?
I don't kind of absolutely say I was wrong, because we have to kind of recognise the achievements.
Well, I'll say it for you, Ronnie Lee, you were wrong.
Yeah. Well, how I would kind of put it differently than that. I think it's a question. It's not a question of like right and wrong. It's not a question of good and bad. It's a question of good and better. Right. The LF was good, but could we have done something better? Right. It's not to say the LF was bad. The LF was wrong, right? Because that would be denigrating the achievements of the ALF, and the ALF did achieve a lot. You know, if it wasn't for the ALF, you know, would we have more animal experiments these days? I suppose it depends on what we'd be doing instead of the ALF, of course. But you know, the ALF is responsible for sparing of the lives of millions and millions of animals, and we can't just kind of, you know, we can't ignore that, and you can't kind of say that's wrong. But could we have kind of implemented a strategy that would have been even more successful than the ALF, and I think quite possibly we could, and I think that's the difference. That's not to in any way slag off the ALF or kind of downplay the achievements of the ALF, but I think that's a valid question to ask.
Yeah, I accept that, and I think that's true. It's not a question of you know, saying, oh, we were completely wrong back there. It's just that there's kind of like a lot we didn't see. I think we might be able to put it that way. And
well, I think you learn. You kind of learn. You kind of learn. You learn from experience, and I think you learn. And it's important to learn from experience. You know, if you do something that kind of hasn't, you know, and you think, well, hang on a minute, you know, was that the best thing to have done, or could there have been something better? Then to refuse.
Isn't the conversation rather academic? Say, for example, we came to the conclusion that everything we did back then was right. Given the fact that we can't replicate it, it's rather irrelevant.
Well, yeah, anyway. I think this is a major thing. I think like the kind of you know, the idea that the kind of, you know, I put forward a strategy for what I believe is a strategy for achieving animal liberation, which is, you know, we're not going to achieve it unless we have widespread vegan education, right? Widespread vegan outreach. Oh, you know, within which a certain type of direct action can play an important part, right? That's how I look at it, right? And you know, that's the strategy that I kind of worked out. But like, I kind of had a strategy back then about like, well, how do we achieve animal liberation? That's the question. You know, the question is, how do we achieve animal liberation? And the idea we had back then was like, well, we just like keep attacking these companies, right, and putting them out of business like one by one until there's none of them left. And hey ho, we've got animal liberation. It doesn't matter about ordinary people because the suppliers are all gone, so nobody can eat meat because no one's supplying it because there's no slaughterhouses because there's no animal farms. You know, that was how we looked at it. That's how I looked at it, right? But our history has proved that was an unrealistic way of looking at it. You know, and that really, had we kind of really thought about it at the time, we'd have come to that conclusion as well. But like, we were young people, weren't we? You know, fired up with enthusiasm. Things started off going very well because the state hadn't caught up with us, because the state hadn't brought in special laws. They'd not brought in special police squads. You know, judges hadn't started imposing really long sentences. I mean, I in my first sentence, I got 3 years for like massive amount of damage. You know, if I was to do that now, that would probably be 15 years, you know, because of how they kind of change, how they're caught on to it. So, you know, we kind of have to, we have to learn from experience. You know, you can't keep, you know, repeating same old when it's been shown that there is a limitation in that type of campaigning, you know, and we all need to think and analyze kind of what we do. You know, you can't just rush in on like this kind of, you know, on a wave of emotion into things. You know, that's not how you kind of conduct a struggle. You have to think about it. You have to analyze it. You have to come up with a strategy that you've worked out how this can work. You know, and I'm not saying that, you know, I'm not saying we are going to get enough vegan outreach. I don't know.
It's almost like personality types, because once again, as I said before, it's as though the ALF stood for something tangible. You know, you saw the other animals coming out, or you saw the meat lorries going up, and that you know, you do a bit of leafleting, you don't see anything.
I think this kind of comment on the screen now is important. You see, every time that you spare an animal from slaughter and suffering, right, or slaughter or suffering, whether you do that through direct rescue or you do that through, you've caused some damage that's caused some reduction in the number of animals that are kind of being used. Yeah, you've liberated those individual animals. But if you want a widespread situation of animal liberation, you know, where we no longer have animal farming, where we no longer have animal experimentation, where we no longer have the fishing industry, you know, where animals are liberated big time, you know, because we have a culture that believes in animal liberation. Right. If that's the animal liberation you're talking about, and that's the animal liberation I'm talking about, in my view, we are never going to achieve that unless we have widespread vegan outreach to educate as many people as possible to become vegan. That's the only way that we're ever going to achieve that. And then a huge number of animals will be spared. A huge number of animals will be spared because we're able to put an end totally to all these things. I mean, the two biggest, by far the two biggest areas of the slaughter and suffering of other animals throughout the world are, number one, the food industry. You know, we're talking about 50,000 animals every second slaughtered for food. And number two, the adverse human impact on the natural world. in various ways, the pollution we cause, the climate crisis, 3 billion animals, other animals wiped out just in the forest fires last year in Australia. And that's just one aspect of how the climate crisis is hugely impacting on other animals, something that's been caused by humans, and that once again is like thousands and thousands of animals probably every second as well. Those are the two huge areas of the oppression of other animals. And there's quite a big gap between those two and the next one down. The next one down is probably animal experimentation. That's about 200 million animals worldwide every year, and that's huge. But like compared with those other two, it's kind of that doesn't mean we shouldn't be campaigning against animal experimentation.
But Ronnie, the conversation that's gone on is effectively, some people are saying, yeah, okay, I know about the numbers, but who is the ones doing anything about it? And like I say, you see DLF as a tangible thing, which is, I think that explains exactly why. When AV emerged and they had this thing about the tally and everything, they wanted to be able to persuade or show people that they were successful, right? And they ended up having to back down from all that because all they could do really was plant seeds. The ALF can actually do something.
I think this is kind of psychologically, why people are attracted to certain things. Yeah,
that's what I'm saying.
But you see, we kind of have to sort of push past that if we're really ever going to get anywhere. Because I know, there are people that are into animal rescue because that is a tangible animal. I can see that animal I've rescued. I've rescued that animal. If I give a leaflet to someone, educate them to become vegan, I don't know the result of that, right? I mean, we do know if you turn a person vegan, or if you even persuade a person not to eat animal products, that will in the UK, that equates to a reduction of demand of at least 100 animals a year to be slaughtered. That's what that equates to. So you could say that vegan education is like a win-win situation in terms of the number of animals that are spared, because it's the route to achieving total animal liberation if we get enough of it. But also, even if we don't achieve that, through the reduction in demand it creates person by person, animals are spared by that. And it's probably, if you want to kind of spare animals from slaughter and suffering, in that sense, it's probably the most effective thing that anyone can do. But of course we don't know, things we don't know who we've educated, and we don't know really who are vegan around us, because so many vegans are kind of so quiet. I only know the ones that are really involved in,
it's like this point here that there's obviously going to be a lot of people who will take a leaflet and then don't give a damn.
That's true. But the thing is, we don't need. You see, the thing is, the important thing to say, we don't need to change everyone. I said earlier, the government we got in this country that's imposed its will horrendously on this country, right, was elected by just 29% of people eligible to vote, and they got in by a big majority. So there's no way we have to educate everyone. We just have to educate enough people so that we're the ones that are in charge, and that isn't even a majority.
No,
that is, it's probably about 25%, and that's a big figure, but it's not 100%. And so if someone kind of, if I see someone take a leaflet off me and throw it in the bin, I think, oh yeah, all right, well, that's a shame, but at the end of the day, if we're in charge, that person's going to have to comply, aren't they? Whether they want to throw leaflets in the bin or not, they're going to have to comply if we're in charge. You don't have to, and we can't be upset when people do that, because we have to remember we don't have to educate everyone. So we only have to educate a substantial.
Terrible waste of resources, Ronnie. Do you think there's another? I mean, we've talked about the tangible versus the intangible. What about another variable, which could be the difference between those who are optimistic about vegan education, those who are not? And I tend to think, and I've been told this directly, that those who are pessimistic about vegan education, so they're never going to get to your 30%, in other words, their attitude then is, we'll never do that, so let's do what we can. Do you think that's
well? Yeah, but you see, but I just said that, you see, if you educate somebody to become vegan, which
but their position is based on, we'll never get your 30% that you need.
but you see that, but the 30%, you see, there's two things here. The 30% is based on creating like wholesale change. The 30% is based on like getting us in a position where we can implement widespread, far-reaching changes through us being in charge and us bringing in the relevant legislation, everything like that. That's what that 25% is based on, right? But like, if you educate individual people to become vegan, what you got is everyone that consumes animal products creates a demand for animals to be, you know, to be reared for food, to be slaughtered, to be dragged out of the ocean. They create that demand. So if you educate someone to go vegan, or even to adopt a vegan diet, then you're reducing that demand. You know, you're actually saying, right, we've reduced the demand. So you're sparing animals, even if you're not like, you know, bringing about total animal liberation. You are sparing animals through that, and you're probably sparing more animals that way than if you spend the same amount of time involved in rescue. You know, because even if I say only educated like, I don't know, 3 people a year to go vegan, well, that equates to 300 animals. Now, what other type of activity could you carry out where you sort of rescue or spare 300 animals? You know, so it's got that. So it's a kind of win-win. You know, with vegan education, you've got a win-win situation. Whether you,
I suppose you might not even know if you've done that with 3 people, would you?
well, you don't. And I think this is a difficulty that kind of, but I think we can. You see, everyone that's become vegan, why have they become vegan? If you ask anyone why they become vegan, it's because they received some sort of information, or perhaps received information from a number of sources that made them decide to go vegan, right? They might have had a leaflet, they might have seen a poster, they might have seen an advert on telly, you know, they might have seen something on YouTube, or, you know, there's all these different things, or a combination of those things. So it's all to do with receipt of information. So we can really equate from that the more vegan information we put out there, the more people will become vegan. And like if you take a cue from the advertising, I mean, I hate the advertising industry, but you take a cue from the advertising industry. You know, what do we see in terms of adverts for a product? We see the same product advertised in all sorts of media, don't we? We see that advertised on TV. We see it advertised in newspapers. You might get a leaflet through your door advertising it. You know, you see it advertised, you know, adverts on social media, on posters. And if you're watching a commercial television channel, you'll see in all the commercial breaks, you'll see the same thing advertised. You think, why are they I've seen that last commercial break. Why are they putting it on again? It's because they know that repetition brings results, you see. And they're spending millions, billions of pounds on that. And so we could take a cue from that, and we can think, yeah, that's kind of what we need to do, like repetition.
Well, I agree with that point. I mean, because it raises that kind of media sociology point that you would have thought, but it's not the case. You'd have thought that one corporation that doesn't need to advertise anymore would be McDonald's, and yet they still do, because it's still about visibility and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, exactly.
It's
and that's
about
kind of what
repeated stuff.
So we can. So it's very, very easy to come to the conclusion that the more information we put out there about veganism, the more people will become vegan. I think
as long as it's accurate. Now, there's a couple of things. Maybe we can finish with these. We're well over 2 hours, Ronnie.
Yeah, that's gone very quickly.
Now, there's some really interesting points. I'm going to come to Deb in a minute, but this one first. Hey, do you remember that band, Eka Mouse? A great band, wasn't it? You know, do you remember that, Eka Mouse? Do you not remember that band?
Well, you see, no, you see, but the fate of the animals, for the most part, are in the abuser's hands. I mean, what you're trying to do is to create a situation where the fate of the animals are taken out of the abuser's hands, because you educate a sufficient number of people to want to do that.
I think they're talking about consumers. It might be wrong here, but I can understand the psychology here because I felt like that. It's kind of like, it's almost like you've got to go up to some flesh consumer and go, oh, please care about the animals or whatever. Whereas the LF is going to go, sod that, I'm going to do it, right? So I understand.
Yeah, I understand that, but you see, once again, I mean, it all comes back. It all really comes back to the fundamental question: if we're going to get widespread animal liberation, right, where it's not just a few animals spared here or there, we're going to get widespread animal liberation, where we kind of have a world where animals are no longer oppressed by humans. That's what we all want, isn't it? And that's what I mean by animal liberation. You know, how are we ever going to get that when the vast majority of people don't believe in it? Unless we change the mindset of.
Well, I totally agree, and that feeds directly into what Deb says here. We can keep bailing out, or we need to turn off the faucet. And so I'll translate that for people in decent countries. That means tap.
Tap, yeah. I mean, I think that's I think that's right, and I think that kind of. I think one of the difficulties as well is that, you know, the oppression of other animals obviously, quite rightly, makes us feel very angry. And I think it's kind of easier to express that anger through direct action and wanting to smash something and that kind of thing. You know, that's kind of what it almost naturally leads to. And so I think people tend to think like that instead of thinking, well, hang on a minute, I need to kind of really analyze what the result is. And I think what we need to do is to kind of use that anger as a fuel. In other words, the reason why I do all I do is fundamentally through anger, because I'm fueled by anger at how humans treat other animals. But I use that as a fuel. You know, when I'm going out and, you know, doing my vegan outreach and doing my stalls and doing my door dropping and doing all the other things, I'm fueled by anger, because that's what's given me the drive to do that and not just sit at home on my arse watching the telly. So I think anger is important, but we need to use it as a fuel, not allow it to control us and not allow it to affect our decision making when we're trying to work out what the best thing is to do.
Yeah, Andy is saying it's good to have quite a lot of different things, but those different things you ought to maximize
I mean, I don't disagree with Andy. I mean, it's very much like I said earlier about that kind of. I'm not going to say to someone who's involved in campaigning against animal experiments, oh, don't do that. Do vegan education instead. But kind of what I would try to encourage them to do is to include vegan education in what they do, which I think in many cases is kind of like really easy to do. And I think that kind of really reflects what Andy's saying here. You know, like rescue, you take rescue, that like kind of, you know, an animal rescue. We've got a lot of rescues now for farmed animals, you know, and it's good to see, you know, I've been to a few recently, and it's good to see that they've got like posters up, like encouraging people to go vegan, talking about the individual animals and what their fate would have been had they not been rescued, for instance. And so, they're doing their bit, or they're primarily a rescue. They're doing their bit for vegan education as well. And I think that's, lots of different campaigns could do that.
Well, you have to be careful now, Ronnie.
Yeah, well, I've been beaten. No, I mean, I absolutely don't disagree with Louise. And I think direct action, as I said earlier, can be a really, really important part of education. I think direct action can be used for awareness raising, as I've said already. And I think that's a much more important function for direct action that goes to the root of the problem, where it's used for awareness raising. And I think if you're using it for awareness raising, you do have to do it in a rather different way than we used to do it.
Well, you're getting pushed back on your own show now, Ronnie. Well, look, it's been a fascinating conversation, probably a bit too long in the sense of people watching the recording, but maybe they will, and hopefully they might. So, yeah, interesting stuff. I had no idea that the topic would have lasted this long in a way.
No, but you see, I think it's I think it's a really important topic, because I think we do have to talk strategically about what we do as a movement. You know, we do have to we do kind of have to have like an overall battle plan for how we achieve animal liberation. And we do have to have that. We do have to have this sort of conversation. I think it's really, really, really important.
I
So
think
if someone's come along to me and say, look, I've got this idea of how we achieve animal liberation, and they told me, and I thought, hang on a minute, that's better than my idea, I'd adopt their idea, because what I want is animal liberation. You know, if someone came and said, look, I've got a strategy that's better than your strategy, and I listened to them, and I thought, yeah, right.
My strategy is bigger than your strategy.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah, but you know what I mean, because this is about thinking how we can, and we have to. We don't kind of think enough like this. I don't think. I do
honestly think that pessimism and optimism plays a big part in this, and I think that some people don't believe that you can get what you want in terms of numbers.
Well, you see, let's look this way. Like, yeah, there are a lot of meat eaters that may never change, but you don't need everyone to change. This is what I've tried to explain.
No, but that's not what I said, Ronnie. I said that they don't think you can get to the numbers that you do need, not that you don't need everybody.
Well, whether we do or whether we don't, you see, if we're ever going to achieve widespread animal liberation, how are we going to do it? You know, what is it that is necessary to do in order to achieve that? That's what I'm saying. Now, whether we kind of will get the numbers we need, to do the education, whether we will get enough outreach, we don't know. But unless we do, we won't get animal liberation. Unless we do, because there isn't really any other way that it can happen, because you're not going to get widespread animal liberation when vast majority of people don't believe in it.
No, I agree. I said that if we can't damage, bring down, and dissolve cultural speciesism, then the other animals are just fecked. They're essentially just going to be at the mercy of the animal welfareists and stuff like that. Then.
Yeah, exactly. You see, so whatever people are doing to kind of to rescue individual animals, and that's all very praiseworthy. These are worthwhile activities that I support. At the end of the day, it's like an unless. To me, unless is a really important word. Unless we have a certain situation, we won't achieve widespread animal liberation. Unless we have sufficient.
You certainly haven't convinced Animal Liberation TV, Ronnie.
Well, no, but I don't expect to be able to convince everyone. Who I hope to be able to convince really is sufficient vegans. There are people that will always do their own thing, and that's how they'll be. And I think the key thing is to convince sufficient vegans to become involved in outreach and to become involved in instigating outreach. That's the key. Whether we kind of convince other people who are already involved in their same, in certain forms of activism already, or are promoting other forms of activism already, I don't know. But to me, that probably isn't the most important thing. The most important thing is that we educate vegans who are currently not active to become active, and that we educate vegans or encourage vegans who are maybe activists already but aren't organisers and instigators to become organised instigators in their local areas. To me, that's the real key. I don't think the answer really lies in necessarily persuading people involved already in other forms of activism to change. As I said, that I think there is a way that they can make some changes that would be positive. But I think the key is how do we get a lot more non-active vegans to be active in outreach? I think that's kind of where that's the problem, the main problem we have to solve.
Well, maybe we'll solve it next week, Ronnie.
Yeah. Probably not. But you see, that's kind of you kind of just have to keep.
Next week's show is going to be called The Solution.
Yeah. Yeah, if only. But I think next week's we're going to do it's supposed to be another of our news shows next week, isn't it?
Yeah, we could talk about that news that we got today about this big victory of there's some egg company that's not allowed to put a lion on their egg now anymore. So
I got confused because I didn't think lions laid eggs, but maybe
no
lion eggs.
I don't actually know the symbolism of that. There must be something.
I think it's like a kind of
red tractor type thing.
Yeah, that they're up to a certain standard in some way in terms of the conditions of their exploitation.
And lion being the king of the jungle and all that malarkey.
Well, I think it might be
more sexism.
It's related to Britain. You know, the lion is associated with
because
there's a Union Jack.
Okay.
There's a Union. Well, Union Jack. I call it because my name for the Union Jack is Butcher's Apron, of course. But there's a picture of that behind the lion on the kind of the mark that they use on the egg boxes. So I think it's associated to do something to do with Britain.
All right. So so the best eggs have got 3 lions on them then.
Yeah, 3 lions on an egg box.
Yeah. Right, people. Thank you ever so much for sticking with us. It's remarkable that you did, and I'm grateful that you have. And we'll be back with the news next week, and then the solution in 2 weeks. Then time, so it gives you a bit longer to think about it, Ronnie.
Yes.
And all that, of course, will happen, provided, Ronnie, that
we are still alive.